Boycotting the upcoming World Cup games in the U.S., the local World Cup committee has been expecting hundreds of thousands of visitors to travel to the Metro when the matches kick off in 5 months.
Calls are growing louder in the United Kingdom for England and Scotland to boycott the 2026 FIFA World Cup that is set to be co-hosted by the United States in months from now.
The German politician Jürgen Hart, a member of the Christian Democratic Union, has raised the idea of a potential World Cup boycott.
Just 4 months ago, hardly anyone was asking this question. Now it's showing up everywhere. What happens if one of the largest World Cups ever ends up becoming a political flashpoint before it even begins? Not because of corruption scandals or stadium delays, but because entire countries are debating whether showing up sends a wrong message. And the uncomfortable reality is that the closer we get to June 2026, the harder it's becoming to separate football from everything happening around it. This tournament was meant to be simple in theory, bigger, louder, and more global than anything FIFA had done before. With 48 teams, 104 matches, and 3 host nations sharing the stage across North America, the United States alone is set to host 78 matches, while Canada and Mexico take 13 each, creating a format built to break records in viewership, revenue, and global reach. FIFA has projected around $10 billion in revenue tied to this event alone, with more than 290,000 jobs expected to be created in the US alone, which gives you a sense of just how massive the commercial machine behind this tournament really is. But scale works both ways, because when something this large starts gaining political weight, it doesn't stay contained, it spreads. And right now, that spread is happening fastest across Europe, where the conversation has shifted from who's winning to should we even be there. The Netherlands is one of the clearest examples, where more than 150,000 people signed a petition calling for their national team to boycott the 2026 World Cup in the United States. That's not a small activist group or a passing viral moment. It's one of the largest football-related civic petitions in the country's history, which shows this isn't noise, it's pressure. The reasoning behind it isn't emotional. It's strategic because it frames participation itself as a signal, suggesting players could unintentionally become part of a political narrative they never agreed to. Germany is dealing with a similar divide, but in a way that feels even more unstable. Because the split isn't just among fans, it's inside the system itself. CDU lawmaker Jürgen Hart has openly suggested reconsidering participation, while figures within football like Oka Guttisch have pushed for serious internal discussions about withdrawal. At the same time, the German FA under Bernd Nandorf has rejected a boycott for now, creating tension where official policy and public sentiment are moving in different directions. Then you add the data point that 47% of Germans in a 1,000-person survey said they would support a boycott under certain geopolitical conditions. And suddenly this stops being theoretical. It becomes a real possibility, sitting just beneath the surface. What makes this even more complex is how inconsistent reactions are across Europe. Because there's no unified stance, just a growing list of conflicting positions. France has taken a cautious approach, making it clear a boycott isn't being considered at this stage, while Belgium has largely stayed quiet and focused on preparation, almost deliberately avoiding the topic. But then you move to the UK and the tone shifts completely, because MPs like Simon and Luke Taylor have openly called for a boycott as a form of political pressure, not just a sporting decision. That shift from football decision to political leverage is where things begin to escalate. But here's where the story turns, because the biggest driver of this backlash isn't actually coming from football itself. It's coming from everything surrounding it. Immigration policy in the United States has become one of the central concerns, especially with reports of tighter visa scrutiny and expanded travel restrictions affecting multiple countries expected to participate. These concerns aren't hypothetical either, because during the lead-up to the 2025 Club World Cup, Iran's delegation reportedly struggled to secure visas, with only 4 out of 9 officials being granted entry for the December draw. That kind of detail sticks because it turns a general fear into a specific example people can point to. Then there are incidents that hit even closer to the fan experience, including reports of asylum seekers being detained near venues like MetLife Stadium during that same tournament cycle. For supporters traveling from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, this adds a layer of uncertainty that goes beyond football, because now the question isn't just about tickets or travel. It's about entry, treatment, and safety. And once fans begin asking those questions, it changes the entire atmosphere around a tournament that's supposed to feel open and global, because football depends on movement. And when movement becomes uncertain, everything else starts to wobble. At the same time, immigration is only one piece of a much larger puzzle, because the geopolitical backdrop surrounding this World Cup has become impossible to ignore. Statements about potential annexation of Greenland, tariff threats targeting countries like Germany, France, and the Netherlands, and rhetoric about Canada becoming a 51st state have all contributed to a narrative that critics across Europe describe as destabilizing. Whether those scenarios actually happen almost becomes secondary because the conversation itself is enough to shift perception. And in global events, perception is everything. That perception escalated sharply on January 3rd, 2026 with Operation Absolute Resolve in Venezuela, which shifted the tone of the entire discussion almost overnight. According to official statements, more than 150 U.S. military aircraft were involved in the operation, leading to the capture of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, who were flown to New York for trial. Reports indicated that 32 Cuban soldiers were killed while attempting to defend him, and the United States later announced it would administer Venezuela, triggering a global reaction that split almost immediately. Some framed it as decisive action, while others described it as a dangerous precedent. And that divide didn't stay confined to politics. It spilled directly into sport. Because now, whether FIFA likes it or not, the World Cup is happening in the shadow of that moment. And that changes how everything is interpreted. Every match, every anthem, every press conference carries a layer of context that wasn't supposed to exist when this tournament was first announced. And when you combine that with the structure already in place, 48 teams, 104 matches, and billions in revenue, you get something that is no longer just a football event, but a global stage where every image can be read in multiple ways. That's what makes the situation so different from past controversies. It's not one issue, it's the accumulation of many. And that accumulation became even harder to ignore when the organizational side of the tournament started visibly overlapping with political power. Because back in March during 2025, a White House task force specifically for the 2026 World Cup was created. Donald Trump was named chair, Vice President J.D. Vance became vice chair, and Andrew Giuliani was appointed executive director, which on paper looks like coordination, but in practice created a level of visibility people weren't used to seeing. Add in the repeated appearances of FIFA leadership in political settings, and suddenly the line between sport and state starts to blur in a way that feels uncomfortable to many observers. And once that line blurs, it doesn't take much for individual moments to take on much bigger meaning than they normally would. Because that's exactly what happened in July 2025, in a moment that should have been routine but instead became one of the most talked about images of the entire build-up to 2026. The Club World Cup final was supposed to be about Chelsea lifting another trophy on July 13th, but the focus shifted almost immediately when it emerged that the original trophy had been sitting in the Oval Office since March, and the team was handed a replica instead. That alone raised eyebrows because football is built on tradition and symbolism, and removing the real trophy from that moment felt off to many watching. But what pushed it into controversy was what happened on the podium when Donald Trump remained front and center during the celebration, even as there were visible cues for him to step aside. Players like Cole Palmer and Reece James appeared unsure about how to react in real time. It didn't end there either because as the ceremony unfolded, Trump took a winner's medal and placed it into his suit pocket. A small action that might have gone unnoticed in another context, but here became instantly symbolic. Within minutes, those clips were everywhere, analyzed from every angle, shared across platforms, and turned into a broader conversation about whether football's biggest stages were being used to project something beyond the sport itself. And that's the thing about moments like this. They don't exist in isolation. They attach themselves to everything else already happening, reinforcing a narrative that was already forming because once people start seeing a pattern, every new image becomes confirmation. That's where the spotlight shifted directly onto FIFA and more specifically onto Gianni Infantino because his proximity to political leadership has become harder to ignore over the past year. From attending high-profile events like election night gatherings in November 2024 to being present at the inauguration on January 20th, 2025, Infantino's visibility in those spaces created perception that football's governing body was getting unusually close to power. Then came July 2025 when FIFA opened an office inside Trump Tower, a move that might have been logistical on paper, but visually sent a much stronger message. And by the time December 5th, 2025 arrived, that perception had already taken hold. Because of the World Cup draw, Infantino introduced something entirely new, the inaugural FIFA Peace Prize titled Football Unites the World, and presented it directly to Donald Trump. The decision caught many off guard, not just fans, but reportedly even members of FIFA's own council, with some learning about it through a press release rather than internal discussion. The timing made it even more sensitive, coming shortly after a Congo-Rwanda peace agreement, and just days after renewed geopolitical tensions, which made it difficult for critics to separate the award from the broader political environment. Human rights group Fair Square went as far as filing a complaint with FIFA's Ethics Committee, arguing that the move blurred the line between recognition and endorsement. Infantino defended the decision, saying it was objectively deserved, but the reaction showed the issue wasn't just about the award itself. It was about everything it represented in that moment. And when he later confirmed that Trump would personally present the World Cup trophy on July 19, 2026, it added another layer to a tournament already carrying more weight than expected. Because now the final image of the biggest sporting event in the world is being shaped before the tournament has even started. And whether people support that or not, it becomes part of a story. For critics across Europe, this is where concern really sharpens. Because it's no longer about isolated incidents. It's about accumulation, about how multiple factors are stacking on top of each other. Immigration concerns, visa uncertainties, geopolitical tensions, military actions, and visible political involvement are all converging around a single event that's supposed to represent global unity. And when you combine that with a format that includes 48 teams and 104 matches, the scale doesn't dilute the issue, it amplifies it. Every match becomes a moment. Every broadcast reaches millions. And every image carries weight far beyond the pitch. At the same time, there's a strong counter-argument that continues to come up, and it's one rooted in history rather than emotion. Major tournaments have always existed alongside political tension, even if people prefer to remember them differently. The 1980 Moscow Olympics went ahead despite a US-led boycott, leaving many athletes caught in the middle of decisions they didn't control. The 1978 World Cup in Argentina was played under a military dictatorship, with debates at the time about whether participation legitimized the regime. More recently, Russia hosted in 2018 after the annexation of Crimea, and Qatar hosted in 2022 despite intense scrutiny over labor conditions and migrant worker deaths. From that perspective, some argue that singling out 2026 risks creating a double standard where our trade becomes selective rather than consistent. Because if past tournaments went ahead under controversial conditions, why should this one be treated differently? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer because consistency matters, but so does context, and every situation carries its own dynamics. And right now, the dynamics around this World Cup feel uniquely concentrated, like multiple fault lines intersecting at the same point. Then there's a financial reality, which sits quietly in the background but influences everything. Because the scale of investment tied to this tournament is enormous. FIFA projection of around $10 billion in revenue isn't just a number. It represents contracts, sponsorships, broadcasting rights, and long-term commercial strategies that have been developing for years. More than 290,000 jobs are expected to be created in the United States alone. And the distribution of matches, 78 in the US, 13 in Canada, and 13 in Mexico, reflects infrastructure planning that is already deeply embedded. That's why even with all the debate, assessments like the one from the Washington Post still suggest a full-scale boycott remains highly unlikely. But unlikely doesn't mean irrelevant, because even without a boycott, the conversation itself is already reshaping how this tournament is viewed. Canada and Mexico as co-hosts are now navigating a situation where they are tied to an event increasingly defined by factors beyond their control. Canadian leadership has had to respond to rhetoric about annexation, while Mexican officials have raised concerns over statements involving potential military action, which adds pressure to what should have been a shared celebration. And inside the United States, there are already discussions about whether strict immigration enforcement during the tournament could damage the country's global image. Human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, the ACLU, and the NAACP have also entered the conversation, emphasizing that events of this scale can easily become platforms of political narratives. Their focus has been on protecting the rights of players and fans, but the underlying message is clear. Once sport becomes as visible, it's impossible to control how it is used. And behind closed doors, football executives are now weighing not just logistics and revenue, but reputational risk, knowing that whatever happens in 2026 will define how this tournament is remembered for years. Public opinion is shifting almost in real time, driven by petitions, surveys, and constant social media amplification where every incident, every visa issue, and every political statement is magnified instantly. Some fans believe athletes shouldn't be pushed into political roles, arguing the World Cup should remain a space for competition and unity. Others argue the opposite, saying that silence at this scale can itself be seen as a statement, especially when billions are watching. And that tension between participation and principle is what's making this moment feel so different from anything we've seen before.